Morning everyone, we're moving on to scene 10 today of A Streetcar Named Desire. Just to quickly rehash what happened in scene 9, we have, Blanche and Mitch together in the apartment, and Mitch tried to make a sexual advancement toward Blanche. Of course, she did not want that to happen and screams fire in order to, to get rid of him, so it was kind of frantic and unwanted. We move on to scene 10, and after this incident, we could tell that it's really affected Blanche because she's been drinking fairly steadily since Mitch's, departure. So she's blasted at this point. She's also packing her things and wearing some really interesting clothing as she's doing so. So I want to talk about that actually on page 131. So Blanche has got on this somewhat soiled and crumpled white satin evening gown, which we know, anything that Blanche wears, we have to look at it symbolically. The white satin obviously represents this sort of purity and innocence that Blanche so desperately wants everyone to believe about her. But the fact that this garment is soiled and crumpled tells us that, this sort of illusion itself is soiled and crumpled, that it no longer really exists. It's been damaged, this facade. In addition to that, she's wearing these scuffed silver slippers with brilliants set in them, which we know, all this clothing, leads people to believe that she is wealthy, perhaps, that she looks a lot better than she really is. But looking at the condition of the slippers shows that even this illusion is scuffed up, okay? Finally, she's got the rhinestone tiara on her head, which rhinestone looks a lot like diamond. We know it's not, so it appears to be one thing, but really is another. It definitely fits Blanche right now. So anyway, as she's doing this packing and she's wearing what she's wearing, she's talking to people that are not there, or she's at least talking to herself. If you look on page 132, she mentions the events of the night of her husband's death, about taking a midnight swim, about drinking and driving, that sort of thing. And moving further down on page 132, we've got Blanche grabbing the hand mirror and lifting it up for a closer inspection. And as she sees what she looks like in the mirror, she catches her breath and then slams the mirror down and ends up cracking the glass. This could also be symbolic here. She's finally taken a look in the mirror and does not like what she actually sees. And, the cracking of the mirror itself could be the cracking of that fantasy world that she's invented, that she's had. Okay, so as she is doing this, we have Stanley coming back home, and there's this conversation between Blanche and Stanley. Stella is clearly still going to be at the hospital because the baby is due to arrive in the morning, and Stanley's home just to get some sleep before he returns back to his wife and his child. As they're continuing their conversation, we have Blanche continuing to spew some more lies at Stanley. One of them being that Shep Huntley has contacted her and has decided he wants her to go on this Caribbean cruise, and that's why she's packing. Of course, she needs this excuse to be able to justify why she's wanting to leave their apartment and leave New Orleans. So that's one of the lies. We also have another lie that she tells on page 137 with Mitch coming by and wanting to reconcile and is begging for forgiveness with a box of roses. So a couple of things there. I'm gonna come back to that in just a minute. I do want to go back to page 136 here. Blanche does point out that Stanley has not been very nice to her this entire time. And this is evident when she says, I've been foolish casting my pearls before swine. That's actually a biblical allusion. It means that she's giving pieces of herself, like the good pieces of herself, to people who are not worthy of them. And, those people being Stanley and perhaps even Mitch. So they take for granted what she has to offer. I also find it interesting that she would use this phrase because, swine is just another term for pigs. And this entire time she's been calling Stanley an animal. So I guess it's fitting. It's consistent. We talk about that, and we talked about how, Blanche lied about Mitch coming back, or the reason why Mitch came back. Stanley has not fallen for these things, and he actually tries to catch her in these lies on page 137 when he says, was this or before or after the telegram from the millionaire? And Blanche goes, what telegram? Oh, no, it happened right as. And then he says, in fact, I don't believe you ever got a wire at all, that you never did get a telegram, and this is all just a crock of crap. So Blanche has trouble keeping track of the lies that she's telling. Thought I'd bring that up to you. And even on 138, he says, there isn't a damn thing here but imagination. It's it's all lies and conceit and tricks. And, look at you trying to look like something that you're really not. What kind of queen do you think you are? So, remember, I don't know if you remember looking back on some of those directions, but Blanche has had a good amount to drink. Stanley has also had a few himself before he returned home, and he brought in more alcohol. So, they're not in the right minds. They're not able to rationally, discuss these sorts of things. So this could only end in disaster. You can see that escalating on page 138. This is also reflected in some of the description that Williams gives us at the bottom here. We've got these lurid reflections appear around the walls on around Blanche. These shadows are grotesque and menacing in nature, and that foreshadows a lot of danger and creates this sort of ominous mood. And this is also continuing on to page 139 with inhuman voices like cries in a jungle. So, jungle would have a lot of animals in it and them acting in an uncivilized manner. We've got shadows and lurid reflections are moving sinuously as flames are going on the wall spaces. We've got outside, we've got this prostitute and a drunkard getting into an altercation. So even more aggression and violence out there. So just foreshadows danger. Moving further down on that page, we have on 139, Stanley coming out in brilliant silk pajamas, and he's, grinning at her and staring at her for a long time, which is kind of strange, and sort of suggestive. We don't think things are gonna end up very well here. Bedclothes are intimate in nature. We know Stanley's a physical sort of person. You can imagine or predict what you think would happen next at this point. He's staring at her even further down on page 139, and his mouth is slowly curving into a grin. And, so another thing that I wanted to point out to you on page 139 was the fact that as Stanley is approaching Blanche, we have this locomotive out there approaching as well. And a locomotive, for you guys that may not know, is a train. And we've talked about how trains sort of symbolize Stanley's aggression. He's coming at you in full force, just like he's about to do with Blanche right now, full steam ahead. I also could argue that, this is like a train. It's about to be a train wreck. And then the pages that follow. Okay, going on to page 140, Blanche requests that Stanley not approach her any further, that he stands over there, and she's pointing to a place, and he says, you got plenty of room to walk past me, and she says, I've got to get out somehow, and he says, do you think I'll interfere with you? And then he says, now that I think about it, interfering with you wouldn't be a bad idea. What he means by that, we assume is sexual. Because he keeps stepping toward her and he's biting his tongue, which is protruding between his lips, which is suggestive. And at the bottom of 140, they're now officially in the bedroom. And I think Blanche sort of realizes his intentions at this point, because she says, I'm in danger, and she smashes a bottle and tries to clutch the broken top at him to defend herself, and wants to twist the broken end in his face. And this hasn't obviously scared Stanley off, because he's continuing to advance. In the middle of 141, he springs toward her and he overturns the table, and he manages to grab her wrist and prevent her from attacking. Okay, at that point, he tells her, drop the bottle. We've had this date with each other from the beginning. What do you think he means by that? That's the question that I want you to kind of think about. My other question to you is, do you believe that Williams intended the rape, which is what we assume is going to happen? Do you believe that this has been something that Stanley has planned for a long period of time? Or do you believe that this is something that just now occurred to Stanley and he did it in the moment? You decide what you think. But I do want to reflect back on, their history together since Blanche has come to New Orleans. Blanche has been somewhat flirtatious with Stanley. She even admits that to Stella. She has him, mess with the buttons on her clothing, like this and that. So it was suggestive in nature. However, and it probably gave Stanley ideas. However, This, you know, doesn't mean that Blanche, even though she has been flirtatious, is deserving of this sort of violation. You know, it doesn't make Stanley's actions okay, but we have to examine, you know, where Stanley is coming from, why he's thinking the way he's thinking. Again, it doesn't necessarily make it right. I'm just wanting to look at that. So, you know, scene 10 closes with her moaning. The bottle top falls. She's sinking to her knees. She knows what's about to happen, and she understands that she is powerless to stop it. He ends up picking her up and carries her to the bed, and trumpets and drums are occurring outside. They're loudly sounding, and then they close out the scene 10. So again, we know that, you know, he is taking advantage of her, and this was not her. She did not consent to do so. So a very violent ending to scene 10. Hopefully this helps you. If you have questions for me, let me know. As always, see ya.